welcome back to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm Stacey Delicat. It is the top of the hour. I have new guests joining me live here in studio. I will be bringing them on in just a moment, and we'll be going back to those McStay family murders out of California we have been covering all week. But first, we do want to talk again about the developing news out of Wisconsin, where 13-year-old Jayme Closs was found alive. The news breaking late yesterday, and we're finding out more details today. This is a girl who had been missing for 3 months. Her parents were found murdered. There's a nationwide search going on for her, and just yesterday, police did find her. This is after the 13-year-old Jayme was somehow able to escape her captor's home and go up to a neighbor who was outside walking her dog and ask for help. Police have identified the suspect as 21-year-old Jake Patterson. He was arrested in her disappearance. We are still awaiting charges and waiting to find out more about that. But earlier today, Law and Crime spoke with the people who helped bring Jayme Closs to authorities, to the woman who was walking her dog, Jean Nutter, as well as to Peter Kasinkas, the man whose home they then went to call 911. Let's listen now to what they said about those moments when she approached them asking for help.
When I saw her, I knew she was in trouble because I knew wherever she came from, she left in a hurry. I didn't know if somebody had just dropped her off, or because she just had on a sweatshirt and leggings and shoes that were too big for her. All I knew is when she told me who she was, I obviously know the circumstances of her disappearance and what happened to her parents, and I knew the person who had her was not a good person, and I needed to have her in a safe place. I went to the first house I thought of because I kind of know the guy there, but he wasn't home. So then I said, okay, Kristen lives down the road from me. I know she's a teacher. I know she'll help us.
My first thoughts were I basically went into shock. Yeah, I mean, it was like I was literally seeing a ghost. We've seen pictures and TV ads and all this stuff, and to have her come in the house and say, "This is Jayme Closs, call 911," was unreal. You know, I didn't think she was alive, and then to see that in my kitchen was quite the shocker. She said she did not know him before this happened. We didn't ask any questions other than who was it and what are they driving, because we were on the phone with 911 at the time, so we were able to give them the name and the color of the car that he was driving anyway. We asked her if she was okay, we asked her if she wanted like something to eat, something to drink, and she said, "No, I'm fine." And she looked really cold, so I just got a blanket off of the couch, and I said, "You look cold. If you're not, you can take it off, but put this blanket on because you look like you're freezing." She was here for approximately a half an hour altogether. When the police, it was probably about 15 to 20 minutes before the police arrived at the house, and then they were here for maybe 5 minutes or so. Once they identified her, they had another car come in and get her out of here and get her to safety. I told Jayme when she was sitting on my couch yesterday, I just said, "I am so glad to see you."
Well, you heard Peter Kasinkas there saying he felt like he was looking at a ghost. They had seen this young girl's face on the news for months now, and there she was alive in his living room. Well, I want to welcome my new guests on the studio, Katie Cherkasky and Andrew Cherkasky, both criminal defense attorneys, joining us in from California. We still have Marty Jo Snyder with us as well via Skype. But let me start with you, Katie and Andrew. I mean, just truly an amazing story here, one that people are comparing to Elizabeth Smart, to the 3 girls who were held captive in Cleveland. What do you make of the fact, not just that this girl was found alive, but that she was able to almost immediately lead police to the suspect's home, and they were able to capture him so quickly?
Well, I think it's definitely a very unique situation. It's very rare to have a kidnapping from a stranger. We don't know a lot about why this person targeted her. To have no prior contact is also a very strange piece of this. So I think we have a lot more to learn. I think that they've only released some of the information that the authorities have about this person. From my understanding, he doesn't have a prior criminal history. It's definitely a rare case. Obviously very good that she's been found safe, but I think we have a lot more to learn about this.
Yeah, Andrew, what do we expect from here out in terms of the investigation? I mean, this is all very fresh. I imagine she's experienced a lot of trauma. Her parents are dead. She's been held captive for 3 months. How do police start digging into this, though, right away? There are so many different aspects to this.
Well, we have a young victim who's going to have to take time to explain all that's happened to law enforcement. I mean, that's something that takes a matter of days or even weeks. There's psychological considerations investigations that need to take place to make sure that she's healthy and doing well. On the other side, I think a big question is going to be the psychology of the defendant, the attacker here. What's going on with him? He doesn't fit a traditional profile of who might do this. So there's a lot to learn, I think, particularly in the psychology angle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a truly amazing and fascinating story. Amazing that she is alive, and hopefully that she will now be able to sort of give us a much bigger picture of what actually happened over the course of those 3 months while she was being held hostage. We don't know yet, what she knows really about her parents' deaths as well. Thank you for your analysis on that. Now, switching gears back to the other big trial, of course, we have been covering here all week, and that is the McStay family murders out of California. When we left off right before the break, we had played a bit of the prosecution's opening argument. They say it was Charles Merritt, Joseph McStay's former business associate, who killed the family over money. But Merritt's defense team says the pieces don't add up. Prosecutors and police, they did sloppy detective work, and they said in the end you will decide it was not Charles Merritt. They are expected to say that it was a third business associate who actually killed the family. Well, we want to now get back to more testimony. Over the course of the last week, we've heard from several family members of the McStays. We want to start now with Susan Blake, Joseph McStay's mother, and we will only be hearing audio from her.
The detectives, that when you spoke to Mike, he indicated to you that Dan Cavanaugh had gotten in touch with him.
Yes.
So you indicated then that, or you testified that on the 9th, the defendant came to your house, you gave him your cell phone number, and he told you he was going to go check on them in Fallbrook.
Yes.
When did you next hear from him?
Don't know exact dates.
Okay.
But I want to say Saturday, Mikey went down there.
Okay, prior to Mike going down there on Saturday, did the defendant call you at all about what he had discovered at the house?
Yes.
And to the best of your recollection, when do you think that was?
It was that same day.
Were you in Ventura yet?
No.
Okay.
Driving.
Okay. And what can you tell us about what was said during that conversation?
This is when we talked about moving the dog bowls, the food and the water, to see if someone was possibly taking care of the dogs and they were out of town.
And what did he tell you about that?
That he would do it, when he went down there with the food and the water, and then would check it later.
Did you hear from him later in reference to that?
Yes.
And I know this is probably a tough question, but do you remember when that was?
No.
And what was said during that conversation?
That the dog bowls were moved.
Well, that was Susan Blake, Joseph McStay's mother, talking about the days in which the family had first gone missing. She talks about speaking with her other son, Joseph's brother, Michael. They were trying to determine exactly what had happened to the family. They went to check on the dogs to see if the dog bowls had been moved. I'll start again here with my guests in studio. Katie and Andrew, this is a case, right, where this family went missing without a trace, and their remains were not found for 3 years. So here we're sort of hearing the family members of the victims sort of recount what it was like in those first few days. Why is that important, Katie, for jurors sort of to hear that, the family had no idea what had happened?
I think it's a really interesting aspect of the case. I mean, it's a very circumstantial case for the prosecution, even with having this defendant with a motive. But to hear the whole history of the investigation and really to understand what happened from the time that we think they went missing and nobody really knows for sure to the time that really their bodies were discovered. There's a lot of time in there that I think the prosecution has to explain. They have to explain what happened during this investigation, why wasn't something done earlier. Was there some relationship that the family had that they didn't typically hear from them? Is that normal? When did things become suspicious? And the timeline is going to be crucial for both sides to really nail that down.
Here's one thing we didn't hear in that clip, but which Susan Blake did testify to earlier this week, and that is that she gave the defendant, who you see there on the screen, Charles Merritt, thousands of dollars after her family went missing because he told her he needed the money to keep the McStay's fountain business running. You know, how much does that tarnish the defendant's reputation, Andrew? You know, that he took money allegedly to keep the business running. I mean, it's a plausible explanation, I suppose, but when already you have prosecutors alleging he did this because of money, and then here he took money from the victim's mother.
Well, motive is always a very important fact, especially in cases that are circumstantial in nature. And so when we have circumstantial evidence that points to a financial crime or a financial motive to commit the crime, that's very strong evidence for the prosecution. The problem in this case is the amount of money doesn't seem to be the sort of money that would lead someone to murder a family of four from a potential perspective. So money is a critical question, but is it enough in this case to establish the motive?
Marnie, Joe, I mean, what do you think about the fact that Susan Blake testifies that Merritt came to her and said, look, I need money to keep the business running while the search is ongoing for the family?
Right. I mean, I absolutely agree with what Andrew just said. I mean, it's not an overwhelming amount of money, not such that would lead someone to murder a family of four, for one. But also, you know, it's debt money. And I know this sounds kind of silly, but like, you can't get blood from a stone. So if he was so desperate to get out of this debt that he had to his boss, he could have run from that debt. He could have been sued over that debt and fought a suit. There are so many other things. Normally when we think of the motive of greed, it's that someone's getting a huge windfall all at once, an insurance policy, something like that. Taking over a business that is super profitable at the time, not one that is having a little bit of problems lately. So I agree that I think that could be a great argument for that.
Yeah, I mean, and also interesting to note, Susan Blake said on the stand she had asked Charles Merritt. Charles Merritt's, first of all, the first person who told her about that no one could get a hold of Joseph and the rest of the family. And then when she asked him to sort of help spread the word, she says that he refused. Also an interesting point there. But I want to move on to some other testimony. We have heard from a lot of witnesses over the course of the week. Let's now talk to hear from one of the victim's neighbors in this, Jennifer Mitchley, about what she recalls about when the family went missing and then later when the remains were found.
Reviewed this morning.
Because my signature is on there.
Okay. And these videos that you reviewed, were they accurate in terms of what you had observed?
Yes.
And after you observed those videos, or after you observed those particular dates, what did you do?
I called them and told them that I think I have some footage for them to look at.
What happened after that?
Two people came to the house and we watched the videos together, and they determined that they needed that, so they downloaded it.
Okay. Did they look at any footage prior to that?
We looked, yes.
And did they look at any footage after that date?
Yes.
Do you recall there being an issue with your video surveillance system that had occurred around those time frames?
Yes.
Could you explain to us what happened?
At times it would stop recording, and from what I remember, there was a time after the videos that I saw today that it stopped recording.
And do you recall what the dates were that your video system malfunctioned and stopped recording?
No, I don't remember.
Do you remember talking to Detective Leibach and telling him that you had footage?
So that neighbor there talking about the surveillance camera on her home, what footage it got of the McStay family home around the time they went missing. Obviously that whatever video evidence it did capture, I imagine would be very helpful in this case, especially because there were so many questions. You know, did the family just, take off and drive to the border and cross the border in Mexico with someone else driving their car? Neighbors like this, I mean, it's a little bit dry, but Marnie, I'll start with you this time. I mean, why is it important for her to sort of be walking jurors through what was going on with her surveillance camera and those details?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the surveillance shows because we can only, we only get to see a little bit here. But one of the things that I think is interesting is they're trying to make that house the crime scene. Okay, so they're saying that he murdered 4 people within that house and then moved them all the way into the desert, driving the victim's car, and that he only put a little bit of DNA on the steering wheel is kind of where they are. So it's really interesting to see, like, well, why didn't surveillance cameras capture something about that? Was it because it was under the cover of night? Is it because it was done in the garage? So if they're really going to prove their crime scene, I think the jury's going to want to know what was going around that crime scene at the time of the alleged murder.
So the surveillance did show the truck in the neighborhood. The prosecution is going to say it was Merritt driving, but it's really not clear. I mean, Andrew and Katie, do you want to weigh in here on, this surveillance video? Presumably, it would be probably hard to see. If you see surveillance video, you know what it looks like exactly, perhaps who was driving the car. If you just see the vehicle pulling out of the driveway.
Any sort of surveillance video like this is important because it puts him at the scene at an appropriate time for the prosecution to use that in their favor. The problem is that when we're looking at surveillance video, we're not just looking to see if he was there. We want to know more. We want to know, do we see family members being loaded into the truck? Is it there for an extremely long period of time?
Right.
Is it there long enough to do the crime?
And there is the video we were talking about. So, we're not seeing much. We're seeing the headlights, perhaps the taillights, but obviously this is what investigators have to work with as they try to piece this whole case together. And as we said, the defense team is saying, look, they did a bad job of doing it. We'll have to see whether or not that's the case. We know this is a long case. It's going to actually take weeks to get through. So there will be lots more to come. In the meantime, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to hear from another key family member in all of this. Michael McStay, Joseph's brother, who was instrumental in helping to look for them right after they went missing, also had a number of communications with Charles Merritt. That testimony coming up right after this break. Welcome back. Well, it was 9 days after the McStay family went missing that Joseph McStay's brother showed up at the family's San Diego home with the defendant, Charles Merritt, and realized they were not there. It was days after that he called the police. Just before the break, we heard him start to describe how the defendant coming with him to the house, how the defendant said he didn't want to go in the house or touch anything because of his criminal background. Well, the defense starts to go after him on that. Let's listen to some of the cross-examination now.
Met Chase Merritt at your brother's house, and you both went inside, or you had, you went inside, correct?
He testified that I went inside, and I was not sure if he ever went inside. I opened the slider to offer him to enter, and I don't recall him ever entering the house, nor do I remember where the phone call was placed from.
Correct. But I showed you the report and what you had told Detective Dugal in your February 15th interview, where you had mentioned in your interview then that you let Chase inside the house. I showed you that, right?
And I clarified that I wasn't sure if I opened the door and he came in or if that was the front door. And so I don't really remember.
I understand, because it's been a long time, but I asked you what, February 15th when you were interviewed, was that a fresher time? Because it was February 13th when you had been in the house, correct?
February 13th I was in the house, and the 15th I was also in the house.
So that interview was only 2 days later, correct? With Detective Dugal?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it obviously was fresher in your mind then as to what transpired, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. In any case, was it on the 13th that you took the computer? Do you recall?
No, sir.
You remember when?
I did not take it on the 13th.
Do you remember when you took the computer?
I took it on the 15th.
So that's when you went with, that's when you were interviewed by Detective Dugal, correct?
And Mr. Tingley at the sheriff's station.
Correct, because you had gone to the sheriff's station first, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So in the sequence of events, your first stop, because you left work, you said you packed up your tools and everything, and then you headed to the sheriff's station, correct?
To my house, switched vehicles, got in the family vehicle, grabbed my wife at the time, and my 3 daughters.
And you headed to the Fallbrook station?
Headed down to the Fallbrook station, yes, sir.
Okay. And so after you went to the Fallbrook station and you talked to Deputy Tingley, then you went to the house on your own, is that correct?
My whole family and I went in the family vehicle, and I can't remember if I led the way and they followed me, or I followed them, but we all went.
So this is on the 15th, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you've already been in the house on the 13th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when you got there on the 15th, did you go inside again with your family?
I had to crawl through the window the same way I did on the 13th, go to the front door, open it, to let the detective in.
Well, let me back up. When you got to the house, after going to the station, you got to the house, was there any detectives at the house when you got there?
I don't recall.
Was it daytime or nighttime when you got to the house on the 15th?
I believe it was in the afternoon, and I know it was cold, but I don't remember rainy or whatever.
Okay. Do you remember if you got there on the 15th and you immediately went into the house the same way you had been into the house on the 13th, or did you wait in your car for a while?
I believe the detective asked me to go in the same way that I did.
And this would have been on the phone, or did it be?
No, in person when we were on the premise.
Okay. So you didn't go in until Detective DeGaulle got there?
Objection assumes facts, not evidence. You never mentioned DeGaulle's name.
I'll ask it again. So you waited till detectives got there before you went into the house? Is that your memory?
No, sir.
Okay. So let's try it again. You went to the Fallbrook station, then you went to the Fallbrook house, correct? You're with your family?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you go into the house, or did you wait until the detectives got there to go into the house?
I believe I opened the door for Mr. Tingley.
All right, so here we see the defense really starting to poke some holes in Mike McStay's testimony. I mean, remember, the family went missing in February of 2010. We're now in January 2019, so we're almost 9 full years ago. On the one hand, can you blame him exactly for not remembering every detail of what happened that day and who went into the house? But actually, I'm going to start with you, Marnie, via Skype. What do you make so far of the testimony? I mean, during the break, we were sort of talking about the significance and why so far it's really hurt the prosecution.
Yeah, I think it really has, because a great trial attorney can really start winning a jury trial during their opening statement. But one of the worst things they can do is promise things that they cannot deliver during the trial. And the prosecutor in his opening statement told us that one of the things that he was very disturbed about was how long Mr. Merritt waited to allow law enforcement into the case, or how he seems responsible for not telling law enforcement on time and was evading law enforcement. Really, what we just hear is that the family acted the same exact way. They didn't call it first because, I don't know, I guess that Mr. McStay is a responsible person and they weren't worried at first. Then they say, and it's a disgrace that Mr. Merritt borrowed money from the mother to keep the business going. But now we hear that his brother shimmied through a window to get a computer a few days after getting really worried that he was missing to keep the business going. So are they really pointing out things that make Mr. Merritt look bad, and is their circumstantial evidence strong enough?
Yeah, I mean, excellent points there. And let's talk about the computer for a second. He took the computer. He claims to help keep the business running. Andrew, he asked police, is it okay if I take the computer? And they said, okay. Later, they went and got it back from him. But, I mean, that seems like a big misstep. Who knows what he could have done with the computer or the hard drive or whatever in that time, right? I mean, not saying that he's guilty, but just from an investigative standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a totally irresponsible step to take to allow someone who has access to this type of information. Computers are often the most critical information in any sort of violent crime. And so for investigators to not recognize that there was something potentially relevant on that computer, major mistake.
I mean, Katie, is it that this wasn't maybe a missing persons case yet, and that this was the brother, and maybe they thought this family went somewhere on their own? Even if that was the case, even if it wasn't officially a missing persons case, is it protocol for them to say, yeah, take the computer?
Very strange, and I totally agree that this is a big problem for the prosecution, and I think that Michael McStay's testimony was very helpful to the defense overall, and a lot of his actions and his memory issues are huge issues that the prosecution is going to have to deal with. I think that it's all very, very hurtful to the prosecution in this case.
Yeah, for sure. Marnie Jo, do you want to weigh in on the computer and the fact that he took it, and then the fact that police said, yeah, you know, take it, and then later got it back?
Right. Well, I agree with what Andrew said. I mean, in general, because a computer is so incredibly important, you know, it's not like he said, may I take a photo album? We want to make sure that we have pictures of everyone to get out to the press to be looking for them. And he took a video drive, if I remember correctly, or something that was attached. It's very strange. And then we also find out that the McStay family had a partnership in this business. So the idea that he didn't go through the business partner and felt that he needed to remove things from the scene is just, it's really strange, and it's strange that they let him do it.
You know, the other part Katie alluded to, of course, was the fact that he's getting really confused on the witness stand. Now, I said, look, you know, 9 years have elapsed. Is it possible his memory isn't that sharp? But whatever the case is, it certainly doesn't look good. Right, Marnie Jo?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that you can do to retain your credibility is to just admit that 9 years ago your memory might have been more clear than it is today, and then to try to see if that's really, you know, a material issue, or if you can explain why that might have not been important to you. And he just was very defensive. There was a part during his direct where he took a drink of water and kind of gave the stink eye to Mr. Merritt. Now, we get the emotion behind that he believes Mr. Merritt killed them, but it's not really great to do from the stand to convey the contempt for the defense. It makes you look like you have a motive to lie against it.
Yeah, I imagine this one did not play out as prosecutors had hoped. We're going to take another quick break, but when we come back, we are going to hear from the sheriff, Michael Tingley, who is the one that interviewed Michael McStay, one of the first who showed up at the house once he called police saying his brother and his brother's family is missing. We'll be right back with that. Welcome back. Well, yesterday in the McStay family murder case, Charles Merritt, accused of the family's murder, we heard from the San Diego sheriff, who was one of the first to arrive at the scene and interview Michael McStay back in the year 2000, February 2000. Let's go ahead now and see how he recounted that experience.
After talking to Mike, after finding the vehicle, what did you do next?
Well, then after I received all that pertinent information, I wanted to go with Mr. McStay to the residence. He wanted to go check it out, so I told him I would go with him. We could check it out together.
Okay. What happened?
Well, then I followed him, or I drove down and he followed me, or I followed him. I can't remember if he was front or back. But either way, we both went down to the residence to check the house.
What happened when you got to the house?
Well, once we got to the house, I had McStay, stated that he could check the residence and the back window was open. So he elected to go ahead and crawl through the window and open the front door for me.
Well, why did you have him do that?
Well, still at this point, I knew that he was reporting a missing, but just because someone reported missing, it doesn't give you a right to technically go into their house and start searching the house unless there's something that gives you that right. So in this scenario, just to keep things on, the side of no warrant or no information that's created exigent circumstances, I wanted to make sure that legally we were covered as far as going to the house, and because he's the brother and he has permission to go in the house and stated that he's had permission to go in the house and has crawled into the window to the house, I elected to have him do it.
He indicated you had been in there before, right?
Yes, sir, yes.
Did he indicate when that was specifically?
It wasn't a concrete date.
Again, it wasn't a concrete date, but it was before.
Correct.
Okay. So you had him go in and let you in?
That is correct.
And how did that happen?
Well, then he went in the backyard, crawled to the window, and then I met him at the front door.
Did you go in the backyard?
I believe to be obvious signs of struggle.
Well, a knocked over lamp could be, right?
Could be.
But it didn't stick out to you, you're saying?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you see any obvious signs of blood, tissue, dead bodies, anything like that?
No, sir.
What else would you look for?
Blood on the walls, door jams, broken glass, maybe broken windows, things that that would normally be what you might believe to be out of place, maybe something near the front door, like as they're getting dragged out, something just to that effect.
Was this normal?
Can you
Sorry.
go further into the question, please?
You didn't see any of those things?
No, sir.
But you called homicide?
Yes, sir.
So if this was not normal, why'd you call homicide?
Well, for several reasons. One, when we did go in, it appeared that there was plates of food that were half eaten and just left, and they weren't picked up or moved. People who have families normally after they're done eating will at least take their dishes to the sink or a counter, or somebody will pick them up. It's a missing family of 4, which is not something that's reported on a daily basis, which strikes to have a little concern as far as, maybe something is going on. The information that I had received from Mr. McStay was that something was not right, something was going on. There was just something not jiving. So when we did the walkthrough of the house, I noticed that they weren't fully unpacked. It didn't appear that it was a fully furnished home. It appeared that whoever was there, in my mind, had just got up and left, which didn't seem, just raised suspicion. It didn't seem like that would be something normal. So to cover my bases as far as making sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's, I contacted our homicide sergeant, because anything that goes further than 10 days, they receive for follow-up and further investigation. So I wanted to let them know what we had to see if they wanted me to do anything else with the incident, or if they wanted to respond out and assess.
So the detective, he decided to call homicide after that. He said, well, it was a missing family, but there were some signs that were surprising. I'll start again in studio here. What was most surprising to you about that, Katie, that testimony?
Well, I think this is the beginning of the problem the prosecution runs into with the investigation. When the sheriff shows up there and lets a brother crawl through a window, suggesting that that is somehow the only way that they could have gone about investigating this. I mean, this is unbelievable. So this is a big problem for the prosecution, the way that this was handled from the onset, allowing somebody to go into what they deemed a homicide scene mere minutes later. It doesn't make any sense. It's not going to do the prosecution any favors. And it's very shocking that the testimony came out that way. I guess that's how the investigation was handled.
Though he did say they didn't have a warrant. It was just a missing, family case. So in that sense, Andrew, I mean, is that a valid explanation for why they let the brother climb in the window?
No, absolutely not. And you actually saw the law enforcement agent almost have a smirk on his face, because I even think he doesn't believe himself when he's saying it. It's absolutely not credible. The fact of the matter is, if the brother had access to the house, he had a right to allow the sheriff to go in. So it's without explanation. It's a poor explanation on the stand, and I think the sheriff actually does a decent job of discrediting himself with that smirk on his face.
Marnie Jo, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely, and I couldn't think of the word smirk for some reason, so I'm so glad Andrew said it. Yeah, he had a strange disposition on the stand. And then the warrant story, too, Andrew, you're saying he discredited himself. Absolutely true. He said, I didn't have any real evidence that this guy, he didn't give me an actual date he had been in the house before, that he had permission to be in there. The guy doesn't have keys. He has to climb through a window like a burglar, but that's how I got around the requirement. Like, if there was anything in that house that someone had to suppress, to say they shouldn't have gone in there, man, would they have a great argument, because I don't know how he thought that was okay. And
A lot
it
of
was just
questions.
a sloppy investigation.
Yeah, already just these two witnesses alone, there are a lot of holes here, very sloppy. Listen, that does it for us this hour. I want to thank Marnie, Joe. I want to thank Katie and Andrew in studio for being with us. Stay tuned. The Daily Debrief with Aaron Keller coming right up after this break.